Well, hello there, and welcome to another exciting edition of Porch Talk. I, of course, am the one and only, thank goodness, Paul W. Marino, and my co-host to my left and your right is the one and only Eugene Mikolenko.
Pleased and glad to be here.
Well, one can only hope.
Let's talk history.
All right. Talk history. What particular history? Well, you told me once that Mark Twain was in Adams.
He may have been there several times, but I know one for sure. He performed at the Opera House, and the Opera House was what was our town hall. The second floor had an auditorium space, and he was the second on the bill. He wasn't first, the main speaker. Mm-hmm. He was here with George Gable. I think George Gable was more popular than he was at the time, even though he had just, he was in between, let's see, Huckleberry Finn and what's his other big book?
Tom Sawyer.
Tom Sawyer, between Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. So he had some notoriety. But he was also, they said he was interested in the handmade paper operation at L.L. Brown. That L.L. Brown had imported a family from England, the Norman family, to make handmade paper. And they had their operation set up on Commercial Street where the mill houses are, 75 Commercial Street, which is now an apartment building. And they said he came and visited the paper-making operation, and I think he may have been a customer at L.L. Brown and bought handmade paper. And handmade paper, by then, already by the 1880s or so, was, had gone out of fashion. I'm not sure who was buying it. I think L.L. Brown was selling it in New York City somewhere to the super rich, but I don't know, who his other market was. And it didn't last long. It did last about maybe 25 years, because I think they stopped making handmade paper like 1907, 1905, somewhere around there. Mark Twain. Yeah, that's about what I know about Mark Twain and Adams.
Well, I will have to look him up in the transcript files and see what they have.
He would be in there, because I discovered him in the Adams Freeman. Was it the Adams Freeman? Yeah, that he had come to Adams and visited.
So that was a weekly paper?
Yes.
Yeah, the transcript was originally a weekly.
It was.
As was the Hoosick Valley News.
The transcript is now, online, newspaper.com, and boy, it has been invaluable. It's amazing what reporters reported in those days, and I'm hoping it's accurate. I'm assuming there's, they weren't making fake news or pushing conspiracies, but amazing resource for local historians.
Oh yes,
amazing. So.
Yeah, using the card file is like panning for gold.
Yes. Well, this is now all digitized, so it's all you just punch in words and you get things pop up everywhere.
Cool, I'll have to look that up.
I'm not sure how much it costs, but newspapers.com is everywhere, but, so it's a great tool.
Well, while you're going on about that, I'll take a chance and look it up now.
Oh, good. I know I just finished writing this month's newsletter for the Adams Historical Society, and it's in the mail, so all my Historical Society members will know it's coming soon. And it's all about the Jones Block on Park Street, and I use newspapers.com to find out lots of information about the people who rented space there or who lived there. It was very good.
So what's special about the Jones Block other than it was built by someone named Jones?
Very special. You know that it's been vacant for 27 years, and this past summer is when it was finally finished. And let's see, the first floor is occupied now by it's called the Hoosick Valley Regional School District, formerly known as the Adams Cheshire Regional School District. Everything now is Hoosick Valley Elementary, Hoosick Valley High School, Hoosick Valley Bowling Green. They're occupying the first floor, and then the second and third floor, I have 6 apartment, market rate apartments up there. But it was originally built as a 2-story building back in 1896. And it was during that whole wave where Park Street was being built up. There were all those brick blocks, 3-story brick blocks on Park Street that you see, were all built within a period of 6 years, one after the other. And this, the Firehouse Cafe, you'll see it has a big granite stone on the top of it, and it says 1890. To the right of it is the Armory Block, and that was built in 95. And then to the left is the Jones Block, which was built in 96. So there was quite a building boom in Adams in the 1890s. For people who don't know where the Jones Block is, it is that building sandwiched between Miss Adams' Diner and the Firehouse. So it was built as a 2-story block, and it also one of its first tenants was the Adams Cooperative Bank, and they were chartered in 1895. So this is probably the first home of the Adams Cooperative Bank, which has now been melted into the Adams Community Bank. And also Smith Brothers Insurance Agent, which is now Smith Brothers.
They also made
McAndrews.
cough drops, didn't they?
Yes, they were famous for cough drops. The Smith Brothers, they're probably one of the oldest operating businesses left in Adams. Simmons used to be Simmons Furniture, but now what do you call it? South Adams Savings Banks was second, and now they've gone and been brought into Adams Community Bank, and so Smith Brothers McAndrews Insurance is probably the oldest operating private business in Adams, and they got their start in the Jones Block as well. But there was a fire about 10 years after the block was built, and I'm not sure how devastating it was because they went and they added a 3rd story to it, and it was back in operation within like 5 months. So
Yeah, that's something.
So they worked fast, and and plus it was fully occupied, so no worry about getting a renter in those days.
Oh, yeah, that's true. And, it's interesting because North Adams' first 6-story building suffered a fire in 1912. And when the Sullivan brothers, who built it, redid it, they cut off the top 2 stories. So anyone who remembers the building, it came down about 1970, will remember it as a 4-story building.
Oh, and what building is that? Do I know it?
Well, that was the Sullivan Block. You know where the Empire Building is on Main Street?
Yes, that has
All right.
Emporium Cafes in there.
Yes, and
yeah.
it was right next door to that. To the west, there was an alley between them. And then there was the Sullivan Block, which was 2 windows and a door wide.
Wow.
But it did go all the way back to Center Street.
Wow.
I can dimly remember being in the alley. In fact, I remember, one way that I remember it was I recall hearing Red Skelton on his TV show telling about when he was a boy, he was behind a theater and interested in seeing what was going on inside. And a man came along, picked him up, brought him inside, and held him up so that he could see what was going on. And that was Ed Gwynn, who was in The Wizard of Oz. Yeah, Ed Gwynn, he played the Cowardly Lion.
So he picked up Red Skelton so he could look.
Yes.
Okay. So how does that deal with the Sullivan Brothers Theater?
Well, I remember being in that alleyway when I was a kid and seeing the stage door.
Oh, and wanted to look inside. Oh, and nobody picked you up.
That's right. Of course, by the time I came along, the Empire Theater was no longer the Empire. The original Empire was what burned, and the next day the Sullivan Brothers were talking about rebuilding, and they tore down the remains of the Wilson House Hotel, which was in front of it, and they also owned. They used 3 still standing walls and added a 4th and rebuilt the theater. And in front of it, they built the Empire Building because the grand entranceway to the theater was through that.
Right.
And
that later became the Capitol Restaurant.
Well,
and then
yes,
now it's
but-
is it still a restaurant?
it's actually a bakery now.
Oh.
In the 1920s, they built a building that my father called the Spite Theater. He said 2 people wanted the same piece of property, and one of them built a theater shell on it to spite the other. Neat story, but he did not remember it at all clearly. In the 1920s, when the Sullivan Brothers were at their peak, they had their fingers in every theatrical pie in North Adams. If they didn't own it, they controlled it. And they built what they called the Capitol Theater off of Center Street. It was a full theater with a stage and dressing rooms. They had seats ordered, they had curtains ordered, a movie screen, projection equipment, and plans for a grand entryway through buildings they owned on Main Street. And they built it as a threat to anyone who might try to build another theater in North Adams. And in fact, a man named Mossert came up from Pittsfield with the intention of building a new theater on State Street, which he was planning to call the Mohawk. And the threat from the Sullivans was clear. You go ahead, you build your theater, we will finish this one and get it open before you can get your ground broken. And that version of the Mohawk was never built. Of course, the Capitol never opened. It spent its entire existence as headquarters for their and later their sisters' real estate empires.
What were the Sullivan brothers' names? Bob and Jim?
No, I honestly don't remember.
And were there just
I
two of them?
remember her name. No, there were 3 or 4, and they all married, but none of them produced any children.
Oh.
And so their sister, I'm sorry, I can't remember her name either.
I love that.
Florence.
Happens to me all the time.
Yeah, their sister Florence inherited all of their properties, making her the single largest holder of real estate in the city.
Now, did she own that house on Church Street next to the library where, is it,
Yeah, the
Dr.
doctor's office is,
Puccio?
yes.
Oh, it's now the COVID diagnose center.
Yes,
That was her house?
that was her house.
And I heard the story that she had left it to St. Francis Parish to be used as the rectory and the
It's
St.
a little
Francis,
more complicated than that.
oh, is it that St. Francis didn't want it, and it sat there
Well-
unoccupied for years. I remember going by it, and it was all grown over, and
Well, she left specific terms in her will that her cousin, Alice Nagel, was to have lifetime use of the house. And if she did not want it, or a year went by without her using it, she could remove anything she wanted from it. And then ownership would go to the parish of St. Francis to be used as a home for nuns. Well, she died in the 1950s. I think it was 1958. And not long after that, the church built a convent for the nuns. And it was the same thing. If the church didn't want it, or it was left unused for a period of 1 year, then it was to be demolished. And the land sold, and the money go into the residual estate to be divided up amongst the heirs later on.
they had heirs. Yeah.
Oh, yes, she did have heirs. And the church did want it, but once they had the convent, they didn't really have a use for it. And it lasted about 10 years, and then it had to be demolished. And she also left instructions that her executor, who was one of the, what was the name I just gave you?
Nagel.
Nagel, thank you, one of the Nagels. He was to continue looking after her property, collecting rents and maintaining the properties, and have the entire estate liquidated by the 10th anniversary of her death. All that money would then go into the residual estate. And there were a number of cousins, members of the Nagel family and some others, and all that money was distributed to them about 1968.
Wow.
Yeah, her file in Pittsfield is 4 envelopes this thick.
What was I going to say about that Sullivan Nagel?
The probate records, yes. Well, I've got newspapers.com here, and it's a little confusing at first, but newspapers.com basic is $44.95 for 6 months, and you can save $275 over 6 months as to paying monthly. However, newspapers.com Publisher Extra, you get everything in newspapers.com Basic, don't do that, 666 million plus additional pages licensed from publishers and archives through last month for $74.90 for 6 months, which saves you $44.50 over 6 months versus paying monthly.
What a deal. So 6 into 74, so it's about $12 or so a month or something like that?
For the extra
$15 a month?
is $19.90, and for the basic it's $7.95 a month.
Oh, okay.
So I'll have to remember that. Put some money into it. Oh, so now before we get any further, Joanne, would you please put the photo? Thank you very much. It's almost as if she wants to do it before we ask. I wonder why. This is our photo for this week. If you know or think you know where this photo was taken circa 1898, please give us a call at 664-4408. Even if it's just a wild guess, we don't care. Give us a call at
664-4408.
Oh, that was so wonderful.
Thank you.
Oh, it just made my heart go pit-a-pat. So please give us a call and take a guess as to where this photo was taken. And I can tell you that Eugene knew it just by looking at it. I didn't have to give him any clues. So, Joanne, would you please put us on? Oh, I keep forgetting that's what I actually look like. Ooh.
You, the man in the mirror.
Right.
The man in the mirror. Back to Mossert. Boy, any relation to Mossert Pond? Or we've got the Mossert block in Adams. I told you that there were 3 blocks. One, the third and the last one was built by, I think his name was Conrad Mossert. And he also...
I will have to look that up.
And he also had a bottling works. And I thought he had something to do with the modern dairy, too, for some reason. The Mossert family, I don't know. So, but
Would he have been in where Gavush, the Gavush family had their bottling?
They had a bottling plant. It was over on Spring Street. That's Spring Street and Dean Street, where the Oasis package store is today. It was somewhere in there. So, and then he sold that out to, I think, Philly Powers. Philly Powers, who was a correspondent for the North Adams Transcript and one of the first, earliest automobile dealers in Adams. He was quite the character, Philly Powers. And he was a big hunter, and he knew everybody in all the hills. He knew all the farmers up in as far as Cummington, and he used to be a reporter, so he would always write stories about what went on in the hills. So,
yeah, that's when the Transcript was a regional newspaper.
right. He's also named the section of Adams called Little Egypt. Little Egypt has a distinction of being recognized by the federal government, and that name appears on all the topographical maps.
Oh, cool. They don't have their own zip code, do they?
No, they don't. They don't. The Little Egypt is a section of Adams way up far beyond East Mountain Road. At the very end, it's next door to Savoy. That's how far up out of Adams it is.
So that would have been a farming community.
Yes, there was a farm up there, but it also was a mining. They mined graphite. Well, they called it a lead mine, but it's that lead, that's graphite that you use in a pencil. And I believe graphite was used as a lubricant also, that they used it to lubricate axles and things like that. So anyhow, and also there was a lumber business up there. So supposedly that the lumber business and the mine business stacked their stuff in sort of shapes of pyramids. And so they originally called the place Egypt. One day, Philly Powers was up there fishing with Morton Burdick. Morton Burdick was a selectman in Adams, and I think he ran for state senator too at one time, or maybe state rep. Anyhow, they were up there on a summer day fishing, and they said, "Boy, it is hot up here, as hot as Little Egypt." So you know who Little Egypt is?
Yes, a shimmy dancer.
Yes, Little Egypt was a famous sex of the turn of the century. So I think they were sort of making sort of that classic, it's hot as Little Egypt. Anyhow, it stuck, and they started. Everybody called it Little Egypt, and now the federal government, what do they call the geographic, where they. The topographical map people recognize that as an official federal name.
That's cool. Now, I was at the Hoosick River Revival meeting at City Hall last night, And something I heard was that they're looking for areas they can use as floodplain. And they mentioned a mine in Adams. And the only one that came to my mind is the graphite mine. But of course, then they realized that that mine was no good because it was higher than the river. So I wondered if you knew what mine they might be referring to.
It would have to, how far, boy, where would it, up in the hill? I mean, why would they have a floodplain? You can't have a floodplain on a hill.
Yeah, I do not know.
I know, just back to Little Egypt. Little Egypt was far up high enough in the mountain that they actually contemplated making a reservoir up there, and they would never have another, water pressure problem if the reservoir was up there. But they did hydrological research on it, and they says that they could not. They could not. There wasn't enough water up there to sustain it as a reservoir to feed Adams, and they abandoned the plan. But it was a Depression era program that they pursued making that a reservoir.
Oh, they should have done what they did with Bear Swamp. Pump the river up.
Yeah. How does Bear Swamp get fed? Is that springs, or is that just a body of water that they keep full?
No, that's the Deerfield.
Oh, the Deerfield River is up there?
They dammed the Deerfield, and then they built a reservoir up on the mountain above it. And at night, when use is low, they pump water from the river up into that reservoir. During the day, during peak use, it washes back down the chute and generates electricity.
And goes back into the river, and then but they still take the water out of the river. Oh.
Yeah, and then they send it up again. That's what happened originally with the fish pond here in North Adams. It was originally Thayer's Fish Pond, and Windsor Printworks bought it, and they built a dam at the west end that raised the water level, I think it was 6 feet, and increased its capacity to 100 million gallons. They put in a drain near that dam that flows, and it flowed down through a 14-inch pipe alongside Bradley Street, behind one house and in front of another, and then where you get to the edge of the cliff, where Bradley Street starts going down steeply, they turned and went out, came down at another street, don't ask me to name it off the top of my head, where it ran into a 12-inch pipe, and then it ran over until it came out, went down the hill, under the river, and into the mill. And one of our city engineers, who I think is gone now, told me that when he was a teenager and he was lifeguarding up there, he could watch over the course of the day the water go down as it was being fed into the mill. And then they'd take water out of the river and fill it back up.
And the Windsor Printworks, they printed textiles, so they must have used the water for, not for power, but for...
No, for manufacturing.
Yeah, so in the process, they needed water, okay. I just, because I know in Adams, the Cheshire Reservoir was built specifically to feed, to guarantee a supply of water to the Renfrew Manufacturing Company, but I think it was just for turbines to make sure there was the water was a steady flow to turn the turbines. But at one time, Adams had something like 7 mill ponds around town. They're all gone now. I'm trying to think if there's any of them that you can say they were still there. I know the last one was used to put out the fire at Arnold Printworks in 1984, when they had that big, Adams's biggest fire, the Arnold Printworks fire in 1984, and that they supposedly lowered the level of that pond like 3 inches, and the pond was like an acre and a half in size, and then they filled that pond in with when they put the addition on of C.T. Plunkett, which is now Hoosier Valley Elementary School, they needed acreage for a playground to meet federal guidelines to get their federal funding. So they cut down Hospital Hill. They took out Hospital Hill. They took Hospital Hill and filled the mill pond at Renfrew Manufacturing Company. And that was the end of that was our last mill pond.
It's a shame. They could have saved them and used them for swimming holes.
They could have.
And skating rinks.
We'll talk about some place that somebody wants to use as a swimming hole in the next, later on in the show.
Yes, okay. Well, I know about Anthony's Pool. Popular swimming hole. That's not open anymore, is it?
Nope, it's not. I think that, it killed it. I used to swim there, but what killed it is everybody bought pools. My cousin went and bought a swimming pool, and why take the walk? And the water up there, as everyone knows, was ice cold. It was brutal. But people loved the diving board, and they had a high tower, and they had a dance hall, they had a jukebox, they had, they sold ice cream and snacks, so it was a good place to meet people and have fun, but it's history now.
Yes.
And we really don't
like
have
a
any,
lot of other things.
and we have no place to swim in Adams. I mean, we never did. Not like North Adams.
Well, of
Fish
course, isn't the lime quarry full of water, or did they dig a drainage tunnel?
There's drainage. It's drained out, I think. Yeah. There's some ponds, stilling ponds and stuff like that, but it's
Yeah, you can't go swimming in those.
No.
Well, there's the sewage treatment plant.
Yes, they have several pools there.
Whee! Well, as I told you before the show, I have a new story. I've been wanting for weeks to write something, and I was waiting and waiting for inspiration to come. And last night, I remembered a story that I wrote when I was in 5th or 6th grade, titled Down the Slot, about 2 little boys. One is the younger brother of the other. And the younger one, well, they find a slot in the ground, and the youngest falls through, so the older brother goes after him. And it leads to a fabulous land of lemonade springs and that sort of thing. And hey, I had a bizarre imagination even then. Well, that thought recurred to me, and the inspiration came thick and fast. So I started jotting it down, and when I got home, I started writing from my notes. And this is what I came up with. It's titled The Slot. I don't know what to say. It's the damnedest thing I've ever seen, the damnedest thing I've ever lived through. Start at the beginning? Okay. I'm Frank Finlay. I live on South Road in Peru, No, not the country. Peru, Massachusetts. If you're not going to listen, why the hell am I talking? Okay. Just don't interrupt me with any more stupid questions. Fine. So I live on South Road in Peru, Massachusetts, southwest of Garnet Pond. Yes, it's a real town. Small one, though. One of the highest elevations in the state. So a year ago, July, I was out hiking in the woods west of my house. Yeah, gorgeous woods up there. Anyway, I'd walked a couple of miles when I tripped on something. It was a hole. My foot sank into it and I went flying. Damn near broke my ankle. When I landed, my foot was still in the hole. I sat up and started working it free. Boy, was it stuck. The more I tried to pull it free, the deeper it seemed to go. Then I realized that the earth, rocks, and twigs around it were flowing down. I sat for a while just jiggling my foot, watching the detritus flowing down, when suddenly a section of ground 2 feet long collapsed. I got my foot out of there, and then I started to see just how big that hole was. It was a good 2 feet across and wider than that. I couldn't tell how wide, but I saw the earth sagging for a good few feet. I found a thick fallen branch and poked at the ground where it was sagging. It collapsed and fell away. I kept poking, and in 10 minutes I'd opened the hole up completely. It was a slot, 2.5 feet wide by 5 feet long. Except where the edge of the forest floor edged over it, the walls were sheer, the corners sharp, and I couldn't see how far down it went. I found a good-sized rock, must have weighed about 2 pounds, and dropped it in. I didn't hear anything for a while, then a soft plunk echoed up out of it. I spent about a half an hour gathering fallen branches so I could cover it up. I wanted solid wood on top of it so no one else might fall into it. Then I made for home, marking my trail as I went. Soon as I got in, I called my friend Jerry Thompson and told him all about it. We made a date for him to come over the next day so I could show it to him. He showed up bright and early next morning carrying an industrial flashlight and 300 feet of rope. "What's the rope for?" I asked. He grinned and said, "In case we want to explore." I rolled my eyes. Jerry was always more adventurous than me. I packed my biggest flashlight and we headed into the woods. We found the spot without any trouble and uncovered it. It looked just as freaky as it had before. Jerry whistled and swore a few times. We shone our flashlights down it and marveled at how smooth the walls were, as if they'd been cut with a knife, and how crisp the corners were. We looked down as far as our lights would reach. Jerry figured the slot was about 30 feet deep, and then it opened into a much bigger space. We tossed in another rock and listened for the plunk. When it came, Jerry tried to calculate the depth in his head, couldn't, then pulled out a piece of paper and a pencil and tried to calculate it again. He still couldn't do it. He grinned at me and said, "That's one deep hole, partner." Then he tied off his rope to a tree, a good 3 feet in diameter. I was tempted to tell him to be careful, but I didn't. For one thing, he'd have laughed. But for another, he was careful. He knew how to climb, and while he was adventurous, he wasn't stupid and he wasn't careless. He put his gear on, clipped himself to the line, then tied a second line and a bowline and backed up to the slot. He lowered himself into the opening, slid down, talking all the while. He commented on the walls, calculated the depth, and so on. When he got to the bottom of the slot and was hanging in open space, he said his figuring about the depth of it was right. It was about 30 feet. He went down a little further and studied the roof of the cave. Nothing special, he said. Also, that it was a little creepy hanging there without walls around him. It was about to get a whole lot creepier. He kept going down until he figured he was about 60 feet. He suddenly went silent. The rope made a sudden twang and slapped against the wall of the slot. As taut as it has been, it went even tauter. I tried pulling on it, but couldn't even lift it from the ground. The loops around the tree creaked, and the tree groaned. Looking up at it, I could see it leaning toward the slot. That tree was 3 feet in diameter. It had been growing there since before my parents were born, and a rope looped around its roots were making it tilt. I yelled down the hole to Jerry, but he didn't answer. Then, oh God, then the rope snapped. The loose ends fled across the ground and vanished down the slot. I screamed to Jerry until my throat went hoarse. The tree whipped back and forth a few times. I covered the slot again and ran all the way home. When I got there, I called the state police and told them I needed a rescue crew. They didn't like my story, but a couple cruisers were outside my house in 20 minutes, and some first responders were following them. I led the troopers out to the site and uncovered the slot. They looked at the slot, shook their heads, and looked at the rope, expecting to find it cut, I guess. Of course, it wasn't cut. It had snapped. Impossibly. It was too new and too strong, but it had snapped. They dropped in a rock, waited to hear it hit bottom, and shook their heads when they heard it. The way they looked at each other said it all. This was way, way beyond their pay grade. They got on the radio and ordered up an emergency crew that could climb. The crew wouldn't be there till the next day, but the troopers told me that as deep as that hole was, there was no way Jerry could have survived. They showed up the next morning outside my house with a ton of equipment, hauled it into the woods with a caravan of 4x4s, some of them pulling trailers. When we got to the site, they goggled at the slot and looked over at the snapped ropes with disbelief. Then they set up a gas-powered generator, fired it up, and put a big tripod over the hole and aimed a laser down inside. In 2 minutes, they had an accurate measurement, or so they said. Said it was 1,000 feet deep. Next, they set up some industrial floodlights pointing straight down and took some photos. Got some good ones of the slot. Said it was amazing there were no tree roots growing out into it. I hadn't even noticed that, but it was true. In a forest, roots grow out in all directions, get tangled with each other. If there's a hole in the way, they grow out into it. They can poke holes in concrete tubing and seriously clog it up, but not here. Whether it was earth or stone, there was nothing coming out of those walls. They let a camera down on a line, taking pictures automatically every few seconds. They got it down 100 feet, then hauled it up again. Then they decided to send a man down. They hung a big pulley from the tripod with a steel cable passed through it. The electric motor that fed it out was on one of the trailers. They braced it securely, turned it on, and lowered their man down the shaft. He talked to them over a radio as he went out of sight. They kept a lively conversation going. The man gasped when the shaft opened out into that huge space. He shone his light up at the ceiling and said it looked as though it held up a couple acres minimum. He couldn't see any walls. When he got down to 60 feet, the radio went dead. The line sang and ran through the pulley. One of the men was shouting into the radio. They reversed the motor, feeding the line out. In seconds, it was whining. The braces on the trailer snapped off, and the trailer started rolling toward the hole. Somebody got on the 4x4 and spun his tires. They raced to get the caravan in line and ganged them together. By the time they got that done, The trailer was on the edge of the pit. They managed to pull it maybe a foot away. The electric motor was straining, whining, and putting out smoke. There was a loud snap as the pulley broke off the tripod. Gunning their engines, they gained a couple more inches. The motor blew up and the line started whizzing out. Someone slammed on a brake. The line went so taut it dragged the caravan back to the edge of the hole. Somebody shouted, "Cut it loose! Cut it loose!" The guy on the radio was still shouting, still not getting any reply. Then there was another loud bang as the line snapped and flew down into the hole. Then everybody was shouting. Not me, though. I was too horrified. The thing most were shouting was, "What the hell happened? That was steel cable. It can't break." When word got out, the state police set up a cordon around the slot. The next day, a bunch of Army guys arrived and cut a road into the site. They cleared out 3 acres of forest and surrounded it with a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. They patrol it with armed guards. I've talked to the scientists they've brought in, though I don't know what to tell them. They don't tell me a damn thing.
Ooh,
Yes.
what lurks in the slot?
And why does it wait until somebody, well, they can lower things down, but send a person down, and when he's 60 feet down,
A horror story.
yes. So that is the news story, and I'm very happy with it, even happier than I was about Down the Slot that I wrote when I was in 5th or 6th grade.
Down the slot sounds like an Alice in Wonderland thing.
Yeah,
Right.
something like that. This is more like my earlier story, The Wall, which is set in Savoy. Guy from Boston buys a piece of property. There's an old man there with a gun who chases everybody out of the place.
That's the boy for you.
Yeah, well, he is taken out by the equivalent of a SWAT team. And our hero goes to look at the property, and in the woods, there is a fieldstone wall 10 feet high. He goes all around it with a new friend from Savoy who is related to the guy who originally owned the property. There are no windows, no doors or entrances of any kind. So his friend goes home, comes back with an extension ladder, and they climb up and take a look into it. And it's literally empty space. There's no ground. There is a hole, rectangular hole, that goes down farther than the eye can see. There's no explanation for what's down there, why a 10-foot wall was built around it. It's just that everyone who owns the property or is taking care of it for a relative, as this old man was, feels it necessary to go there and guard it. And the narrator's last line is, "I think I'd better buy a gun." And he is going to live there on that property for the rest of his life, keeping people out.
Have you ever been to, in Savoy, Tower 52 or 51? It's a fire tower
Yes,
off of
I
Adams
have.
Road, up that huge hill. Well, on the other side of it, there is this concrete block building surrounded by a chain link fence with razor wires at the top,
yes.
and there's no lawn. It's all pea stone, stone, and I think there's a couple of probably like disc transmission discs up there,
Yes.
and it just looks really ominous. Like, oh, I wonder who lives there. Someone said, I think a couple from New York City live in there.
Well, you know, that reminds me of the movie Piranha. A couple of young people are hiking and they come across a chain link fence topped with barbed wire, and there's a sign that says U.S. government property, keep out. And there's a building there, but it looks like it's been deserted for a long time. So they go in, and there's a swimming pool there. So they jump in. Next thing you know, they're screaming, and then they're gone. And the door of the building opens up, and the guy looks out and closes the door again. Well, to make a long story short, he was put there during the Vietnam War to breed piranhas that could survive in colder water. The idea being to release them into the rivers in Vietnam so that they could get rid of the Viet Cong that way, or at least make things very difficult for them. And he's been doing more than that. He has bred them for intelligence. And he has also bred them to survive in salt water. Well, someone comes looking for the two people that died in that pool, and he hits the lever that drains the pool, and the guy freaks out. And so they contact the government to warn them that these piranhas are loose. And the government closes off a dam and knows just what poison to put into the river. You know, and a lot of the piranhas die. But since they know that these, this fellow and some other people are trying to get downriver, since they know the piranhas are intelligent, they notice there is a way around the dam. And the government says, oh, nonsense. The piranhas have found their way around the dam, and they are going, well, there's a summer camp going on. One of the counselors gets it. And below that, there's an old chemical plant, and then there's the ocean. So the government is trying to keep them from warning people about what's coming downriver. And the scientist in the group finally goes after the chemical plant, dives into the water with a rope around him, and he swims into the chemical plant. And of course, the piranhas going after him, and he opens a valve that dumps chemical into the stream. And even as he's being bitten, then he gets whipped out. And the woman from the government is reassuring the press that all of the piranhas were killed, nothing got out, everything is perfectly fine. And we dissolve to a shot of the ocean washing up, and then it turns blood red.
So there'll be a sequel to this movie.
Well, no, it's saying that the piranhas are in the ocean. No one is safe now.
It's a sequel. Piranhas 2.
Yeah. There could have been a sequel, but there wasn't, as far as I know. I did find out that there were 3 sequels to the Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
You can watch the first one on YouTube, Return of the Killer Tomatoes, and you can watch it without commercials.
I'll have to put that on my watch list. Well, we can talk about the picture.
Return of the Killer Tomatoes. Return of the Killer Tomatoes.
And it has a soundtrack. Okay.
Oh, yes.
John Williams soundtrack.
And then there's some complaints that are put on the screen that this is just just rerunning footage from the original movie.
Right. Well, we got to talk about this picture here.
All right, so yes,
running out of
Joanne, put the photo in front of us, please. Thank you. And where was this photo taken?
This is the Bassett Reservoir off of West Road in Adams,
Yes, sir.
which is no longer used. All our water in Adams comes from the wells in Cheshire, but this was one of the first main supplies of water in Adams. Which started our fire district, our Adams Fire District in 1873 or 76, where they finally had a steady supply of piped water. People didn't have to depend on wells anymore.
So why aren't they using this anymore? Joanne, you can put us in front again.
I think it's because.
Thank you.
Remember acid rain scare?
Yes.
There's something about that you can no longer have, and plus also a terrorist. You can no longer have open bodies of water as your drinking water, and that would be accessible to someone who could, poison the pond or something like that.
Well, that's
But Bassett
interesting.
Reservoir was a popular spot to drown yourself. I think I know like 2 or 3 people who drowned themselves in Bassett Reservoir. I
And
think it
in
was
fact,
a spike.
in fact, it has 2 reservoirs.
Yeah.
Because there's a smaller one upstream.
Oh, right, across the road, right, yeah. And it also fed the, I wonder if it still feeds the fire hydrants. I bet you it feeds the fire hydrants still, while the wells would feed the drinking water supply. So,
Oh, that could be.
yeah.
Something
We'll have to
look
invite
into.
Nick Johnson from the water department. Maybe he knows.
We'll have to ask him.
So give us a rundown of how the water moves through Adams.
Yeah, well, that's interesting that you can't have open water because we still have 2. We still have Notch Reservoir and Mount Williams Reservoir.
And maybe you can, but you have to treat it somehow. Maybe
Yeah,
Adams
they
doesn't,
do.
Yeah, so Adams doesn't have to treat that water, maybe, or they must pump something into it, but I don't know. But.
All right, we have 12 seconds left. Actually, less than that now. So,
Countdown.
thank you for being here again,
Yeah, thank you for calling me
Eugene.
and reminding me.
Joanne, thank you for
Thank you,
directing.
Joanne.
Thank you for watching. We'll see you in 2 weeks here on Porch Talk.
Porch Talk.